This interview is for information only and should not be considered as investment advice or a recommendation to buy shares in the company featured. Welcome to this Stock Box interview.
Joining us today is Ben Turney from the site office in Zimbabwe, the CEO of Kavango Resources. Thank you for your time, Ben. Been a little while since we've spoken. I know you've been busy on site, but also down in Cape Town at the Indaba and the 121. But how are things generally?
Brilliant, Mark. Going really, really well. I've just obviously shown you the office space we have and the yard and the core shed that we built here and our map room as well with all the data that we're working with. So yeah, as you can see, everything is all really starting to come together. At some point, maybe we should do a little video presentation to show our shareholders the infrastructure that we've built here already and also down at our field camp in Philibouzi. It's a beautiful day in Zim and yeah, life is good.
Indeed, yeah, it would be nice. Maybe I can come and visit. You did give me a quick little tour on the webcam there. It looks like there's a lot more than most in these situations. A lot of data, as you said there. So yeah, maybe a trip down will be on the cards at some point. But yeah, it's always nice to see a bit behind the scenes, isn't it, of what's actually going on in the mining companies? Because
well, we'd love to have you down here, Mark. And yeah, as you say, we can perhaps do some media and some proper videos just to show people exactly what it is that we build. I think that doing these interviews is great, and obviously we put out the RNSs, but it doesn't really bring to life, just quite how far Kavango has come over the last year. And I think it would be quite surprising for a lot of our shareholders. So it'd be good to show them.
Good. Well, I know we're going to go through a presentation. It's a presentation that you made at the 121 there to investors. But just before we go into that, have you got any thoughts from the Indaba or the 121? I know you were very busy when you were there.
Yeah, so we had 4 days down there. It was, as you say, extremely busy. At 121, it was extremely successful. I love that event. It's really well organised. We had 26 meetings in total, so it was a pretty grueling schedule. We met a lot of investors. We met a lot of potential project partners, some of the major mining firms. A lot of questions were asked about Zimbabwe this time, which was a really noticeable difference. But the event was extremely successful, and then we had a couple of days follow up after that because so many people come down to Cape Town for the Indaba. It's a good opportunity to meet potential new partners, existing partners, and we've got a few deals that came out of that we're just putting final touches to help grow our business. So overall, it was extremely successful. Steve Smith and Hillary and Dave Catterall were with me down there. They had a number of meetings themselves independently. We had meetings as a group. So it was pretty tiring, but it was a very, very successful trip. We enjoyed it.
Good. And lots of interest from the people that you spoke to, investor-wise.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, it's not reflecting yet in our share price or in our volume, but I think once we've actually started to show some of the results that we believe are coming up, then I think that we will start to attract more buyers in. But certainly in terms of what we're doing over the long run, and particularly having secured the backing from the Consagra family, I mean, I think that's really helped put Kavango on the map, where we bucked the trend globally in terms of small cap exploration, and the backing that we have from the Consagras is it's obviously hugely influential on our ability to deliver our plans, but also I think reputationally it's made people sort of take a look at Kavango. And after we've not had so much success in the field, and we have made a few mistakes over the last few years, I think with the lessons that we've learned and what we've managed to achieve over the last year, I think the penny is starting to drop with a few people.
Good. Okay. Well, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Consagras and, of course, the broader picture of Kavango in a moment. So if I bring in the presentation here, and I'm happy to sort of hand over to you, and I'll interject with questions when appropriate.
Yeah, please do. So the presentation that we're about to look at is the investor presentation, the investment case for Kavango that I gave at the 121 event in February. So we started off on the first page looking at Pure Bond's, the rationale behind why has Pure Bond invested into Kavango. So the Consagra family are a family of ultra high net worths. They built a really impressive and large business empire across Africa. They have interest in mining, they have interest in oil and gas, in the leisure industry and in industrials as well, so commodities. So the family has built a really fantastic business over the last 50 years, and they've taken a very, very strong interest in Kavango through our director, Peter Winterby. Now, Peter joined our board a year ago. Peter was essentially the main founder of Kavango Resources, which he's taken from an initial $100,000 investment back in 2015 into the Mimbula copper asset in Zambia. Now, Peter made that investment at a time when copper was on its knees and there was no interest in investing in Zambia at the time because of fairly recent legislation changes and attempts at nationalization that had happened there. But Peter was bold enough to go for that investment opportunity, and over the last 9 years, he's built that company up to a valuation somewhere in the region of £1 billion as a privately held company. He's raised $220 million as well along the way to bring that mine into production. So the success that they've had there has been phenomenal. And what Peter saw in Kavango was an opportunity to repeat that success. Now, as we've talked about previously, Mark, the Consagras are investors in Kavango Resources through Peter. They have a huge amount of confidence and trust in him. So really, with Peter joining our board, that put us on the map for the Consagras. They were able to watch our progress. They first invested into Kavango in November 2022 in our placing. They took £1.5 million of that placing at the time, so it was a fairly minor investment for a family of these resources. But over the following months, as we started to explore the potential for moving into Zimbabwe, we looked at what we were going to do in Botswana and how we would really sort of refocus our efforts. By this point, we'd also started to work with Dave Catterall, who was already starting to have quite a significant influence on our approach towards Botswana. So in those early days last year, everything sort of all started to come together. And of course, that culminated in the £6 million placing that we did with Pure Bond that we first announced. I think it was in May last year. It took about 5 months to complete once we'd been through the whitewash process and the takeover, the whitewash process and the prospectus. But really what the Consagras invested into, and all of that process was quite painful for them to make the investment into Kavango, but they stuck with it because they saw the first mover advantage that we have in Zimbabwe with the really enormous opportunity that's right in front of us, but also the blue sky potential that we also have in Botswana, in the Kalahari Copper Belt, in particular with Dave's technical experience and his track record of success, having discovered the Zone 5 mine that recently was sold through Khoemacau Mining for $1.8 billion. Dave's track record and pedigree as an exploration geologist really is second to none. So having him taking sort of an increasing role in Kavango was also a big attraction. And we all buy into Dave's vision as we move forward.
Okay. And how much involvement do the Consagras have on sort of a daily basis or, in the overall strategy of the company?
At the moment, not very much.
Okay.
And that's how they plan to treat this. This is an investment of theirs. As they said in the interview, when you interviewed Bullo, I think it was in June or July last year, Mark, it was one of the questions that you put to Bullo, do they have any interest in taking a board seat or directing the company? And the answer is no, they don't. They bought into our management team, into our management structure. They really do trust Peter, and having Peter's heavy involvement in the company, I think, has gone a long way to really sort of gaining their full support. But though as they said to you, they have no interest in taking a board seat. I mean, of course, I stay in regular contact with Bullo in particular, keeping him sort of updated as to what's happening and sort of how the company is developing and how we're using their money. But the relationship is very, very strong, and they are fully behind us and fully supportive.
Okay. And is there a strategy when it comes to investing and going forward? Because of course, that placing there that they took part in 7.5 million back in November 22, taking now hold 52% of the company. Of course, money doesn't last forever, particularly in this game. Is there a strategy going forward? I'm thinking of in terms of placings and retail investors who might want to get involved, or you going back to Pure Bond. Do you have any thoughts on this?
So moving forward, now that they have the 52% stake in the company, Pure Bond is going to act as our main cornerstone investor.
Okay.
Now, that's obviously a fantastic position for a company like ours, because it will mean that moving forward, we won't be at the mercy of discounted broker placings as we have been in the past. We won't need to issue warrants as we have done in the past. So the whole investment proposition for Kavango is really changed fundamentally, because we have the backing of this long-term investor that has a lot more money behind it ready to come into the company.
Okay.
We're also going to look at exploring other potential financing options. You know, there's the potential for direct project investment, for potential loans into the business. I mean, there are a number of different opportunities that we can potentially look at. But by having the Consagras with their 52% stake, and just to remind you, having gone over that 50% threshold, they can trade freely in Kavango stock between 50% and 90%. So that's a really key threshold for them. And they've told us that they're going to maintain their 52.5% shareholding, which means that we have the long-term benefit of what amounts to this cornerstone investor.
Okay.
Now it's up to us in the company to show what we've been doing over the last few months. Our news flow has been much quieter, but we have a lot of results that are going to be coming out over the coming months, which I believe are going to demonstrate the genuine value that we've built up in this business. So I'm expecting our share price will start to gain traction, but where in the past and where a lot of other companies, when they see that sort of progress, they then take that as the opportunity then to raise into a rising market, and you get what amounts to a spike, even if it's a bit of a prolonged spike, and that then takes the momentum out of the stock. What I'm expecting moving forward is that our financing strategy will be much more positive for the share price, because we won't be looking to put the brakes on the share price, and by having to be forced to take on a discounted broker-led placing. So yeah, I think we're in good shape moving forward, Mark.
Good. Well, of course, you do have to have hopefully some success. So let's talk about how you might get there.
So we had this quick quote from Bullo himself. This was actually a quote from the interview that you gave with Mark, and it really just sort of underlines his confidence in the board and what our plans are and their support for Kavango and the company. But to answer your question, let's start talking about Zimbabwe first. So our strategy in Zimbabwe is we're targeting bulk mineable gold discoveries that we can develop into producing mines. It's really quite a simple strategy to describe. The opportunity in Zimbabwe is enormous. On the map behind me, we have a geological map of Zim, and one of the amazing things about the country here and the jurisdiction is that this country hosts 22 Archean greenstone belts. Now, these are some of the world's oldest rocks that are near surface, and they are almost identical in makeup to the Archean greenstone belts that you see in Western Australia and in other jurisdictions around the world. Now, Western Australia is particularly important to learn about and to understand about, because from the late 19th century through to the late 20th century, gold mining and production in Zimbabwe and Australia broadly mirrored each other, because you've got the same geological terrain and the same sort of makeup of deposits. A lot of the historic high-grade mining that occurred in Australia was the same as occurred in Zimbabwe. I'll talk a bit more about why that is relevant, but it's certainly worth highlighting here. One of the key things about Zimbabwe is since the country became independent and transferred over to majority rule in 1980, the country's been through quite a few growing pains. I think that's probably the best way to describe it now. It's been quite a painful history here. It's a society that is still suffering some of the effects of that. There are signs of recovery and hope moving forward, but Zimbabwe has not had the easiest time over the last 50 years. Now, where the rest of the world, and in particularly in geology and exploration, has advanced, in Zimbabwe, because of the issues that there have been here, there's been very little modern exploration. So despite this country hosting what really are some of the most prospective areas anywhere in the world for large-scale deposits, not only in gold, but in base metals as well, and diamonds and precious stones, there really is a huge amount of untapped potential. But it's the gold sector that we're focusing on. What we've recognized through Steve Smith, and Steve was the ex-Anglo-American business development manager for Tanzania for 8 years. He had a very successful career at Anglo before that. Well, Steve's been active in Zim since 2008. So he spent 15 years trailing around the greenstone belts and the gold fields. And I think he's probably one of the world's leading authorities on the potential that there is here for large-scale mining. So through Steve, we recognized the opportunity and the potential for, undiscovered potential for these large-scale deposits. But one of the things that we really want to focus on is, if I think about the commercial aspect of this, so where the geological potential is very well known, what I think a lot of the market hasn't really thought about or understood is the example of Caledonia mining. Now, Caledonia has been active in Zim, I think, since 2007, maybe 2006. But over the last 10 years, they've paid 10 years, 40 consecutive dividends. So that's been through two major periods of hyperinflation, the transfer of power to the current regime, some of the country's, difficult economic times. But despite that, Caledonia's dividend record has been untouched and unsurpassed as well. So that does show that when you can make these discoveries and bring these mines into production, there is a tried and tested and very clear way for investors to see a return. And I think that one of the main challenges that Zimbabwe faces is actually reputational. The reality here on the ground is very different to what the statistics and what the reports will tell you. So where Zim features towards the bottom of pretty much any mining report that you see for sort of it being a good jurisdiction to operate in, the reality on the ground is that you've already have a very thriving mining sector, which is chronically underfunded and has got a lot of, as I say, reputational baggage that's historic and not necessarily that deserved. You definitely need to be strong on the ground in this country. This is why I've moved here full time. But the opportunity here really is extremely large. And in the 7 months that we've been here, we've managed to achieve a great deal. We've imported a rig, we've drilled 1,400 meters, we've got into the soil geochemistry, we've been running geophysics. So we've shown that companies can come into this country and can move very, very quickly. So the opportunity is a very exciting one.
Okay, so you talk there about bulk mineable gold mines. So this is, you're going after past producers almost?
So the opportunity, we're looking for historic producing areas but that haven't been tested for modern bulk mining. So the historic high-grade production, in very, very simple terms, Mark, if you think about how these gold deposits formed hundreds of millions or billions of years ago, you'd have what are called here reefs that run in parallel to one another, these sort of high-grade areas, exactly the same as you had in Australia as well. And these are what hosted the historic high-grade production. What the Australians figured out in the 1970s was where the historic production was largely getting mined out and wasn't delivering sort of what was needed for a modern economy. What they started to do was to look at approaching this from a completely different way and looking at all of the material that was in between each of these reefs. So what they did is, if you imagine you've got a series of reefs running in parallel, sort of vertically, as I'm indicating now, if you consider horizontally drilling and testing all of these reefs and the material that's in between, the way that the mineralization works is that typically you have like a high grade reef, which will then have an envelope of mineralization surrounding it that's much lower grade. Historically, this would have been viewed as waste rock, but might run at, let's say, between 1 to 2 grams a ton, where the historic high grade could have been running at, let's say, 10 grams a ton. But what the Australians figured out is that by looking at all of this material that was in between these reefs, in between these veins, what you would sacrifice in terms of high grade, you would make up many times over in terms of overall tonnage. So that's why the modern mines in Australia might be running at, let's say, a gram a ton, but these are producing millions of ounces of gold instead. And what this chart shows us is that, interestingly, in 1982, Zimbabwe produced more gold than Australia. However, from 1983 onwards, Australia started to go through the bulk mining boom, where it moved away from that old, smaller scale style of mining for higher grade material and started focusing much more on the bulk tonnage of the lower grade material. And as you can see from this table that we're looking at now, Australia hasn't had a recession, I think, for 38 years, and it's all been largely driven by this incredible gold production. They went from being sort of outside the top 10 producers worldwide to consistently being in the top 3 uninterrupted since. A similar opportunity exists in Zimbabwe, and that's exactly what Kavango is looking to try and achieve.
Okay, and when you're talking here about the tonnage, are we talking here like open pit bulk mining? Is that the idea? Yeah, open pit. Okay,
that's
good.
exactly what we're looking for.
So
there's potential as well. There's potential for underground mining as well on a larger scale, similar sort of principle. And there are some opportunities that we are aware of that we are looking at in that respect. But our primary objective now is to identify near surface bulk mineable deposits.
It's very interesting that you talk about the similar geology there, and the fact that Australia just, well, more advanced economy, Zimbabwe's history, perhaps whatever the reasons might be, that Australia sort of shot ahead on exploiting these deposits. But you feel that that opportunity is still lying in wait in Zim.
Well, it is. I mean, the geology hasn't changed over the last 40 years. And this also actually speaks to one of the great strengths of what we see as the specific opportunity in Zimbabwe today, is that to develop these mines, we're talking about technology, Mark, and equipment that's fit and methods, sorry, that are 50 years old. So where the Australians had to go through quite a lot of trial and error and sort of develop this bulk mining opportunity in their country, in Zimbabwe, they won't need to do that because all of those lessons have been learned decades ago. So if we can identify these style of deposits, which we believe are there, then bringing those into production should be a relatively straightforward job. I mean, mining is always going to be costly and it's a complex venture to engage in. But a lot of the knowledge and the expertise and the hard lessons have already been learned and are already out there. So, yeah, I think it's one of the things we're most excited about, and it has the potential to transform this country's economy.
Okay, well, before we move on to the other projects, just a couple of questions I have here on the Zim opportunity. You said it's important to be on the ground. I know you've moved out there. That's a pretty significant move in itself. You don't see many CEOs doing that. But also the government, they've got to support as well. So I guess a couple of questions here. Do you have any insight on the government attitude? Did you pick up anything from Indaba about the investment appetite and the government being on board for investment for projects like this in Zimbabwe? And second, you are on the ground. So what plans do you have to really, exploit that opportunity that you're there to make sure you can get the governments that you need on side to go and seek out these opportunities?
So we didn't learn anything particularly about Zimbabwe from Indaba, but what we have been doing is doing a lot of networking, both in Harare and locally in Bulawayo. So there are a number of key stakeholders, sort of government organisations. So you have ZEDA, which is the Zimbabwe the Investment Authority. You have the Ministry of Mines. You have the Chamber of Mines. There's the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. All these organisations that are very keen to play an active role in the development of Zimbabwe's mining economy. The president of Zimbabwe has gone on record. He's outlined his vision for turning Zimbabwe into a higher middle income economy by 2030. So what that would basically mean is that then the median income would come up to around about $5,000 a month from about $1,200 a month, which is where it currently stands. A year. So it sounds like quite an ambitious target, and obviously you're looking at 4 times growth from the current level, but it's possible, it is achievable. The amount of mining opportunity that there is in this country, and because, as I described, the methods and the technology that's required is quite old in terms of what's available globally mining. Now you don't need a huge amount of capital in this country to make a very big difference. So there's certainly I think a strong desire here to see that vision be realized. There are still some cultural challenges that we face, and just being completely honest about it. For example, there isn't a culture of exploration in Zimbabwe. So actual modern exploration is something that's quite new here. So for the various government departments and the stakeholders really to understand what this business is about, there's a bit of an education process that we as a company need to go through. But what we're finding is through our active engagement, both locally at local level and at national level, we think we're starting to gain some traction, and we're winning some supporters as well. So I think there is a general willingness to see a business like ours succeed because others will follow in our wake. But there's also an openness to engage in dialogue with us as well. So there have been some frustrations and a few challenges as you would expect, but I put those down to no more than teething problems at this stage.
Okay. I know this is a presentation on the company, really, investment proposition, not necessarily a project-specific exploration focused, but I do want to ask you, if I can, you talk there about you've got to identify these deposits. I mean, can you talk to plans at the moment, or is that something for another time?
Well, it certainly, just in very broad terms, Mark, a lot of the work has already been done because there is a strong pedigree of what amounts to artisanal and small-scale mining in Zimbabwe. What these guys are doing is they're scratching away at the surface, but what they've done is they've done a lot of the scouting. So when you go out into the field here, you'll see mining activity everywhere. And for a company like ours, what's particularly useful is we can see where these parallel reefs are because they've been mined. You can clearly see them, even to my untrained eye, I can see sort of, on different projects. That helps us a lot because it means a lot of the scouting has been done.
Okay.
The target areas themselves are quite condensed as well because a lot of the scouting's been done. So we know where the potential deposits already are. So it's not like in Botswana where we have the greenfields exploration and we're pretty much starting from scratch, covering thousands of square kilometers, trying to narrow in on areas where deposits might be. In this country, we know where the deposits are because they've already been mined, either historically, largely through underground mining, or in more recent times through the sort of artisanal and small scale work that's been done. In terms of our exploration model, because of all of this and because there is so much opportunity here, we've set the bar very high in terms of our exploration goals. And if a project doesn't meet our exploration goals, we'll drop it immediately and move on to the next one. We've got a very large pipeline of potential projects for us to pursue. But so far, the exploration we've done has been going very well, and I'm looking forward to releasing the first results.
Okay, so you've got a number of projects, and it's not just one with you're targeting. You've got a number of projects in the portfolio.
So at the moment, we've got the main two projects we're focusing on are Hillside and Nara. We also have Leopard that we're now starting to do a bit of initial work on. But beyond that, we have a pipeline of quite a few other projects that we are aware of, and we've been talking with owners of, potentially with a view to taking those on. But let's see how we get on at Nara and Hillside first.
Well, before we move on, Ben, we can talk about the other opportunities that might come out of Zimbabwe.
Yeah, so you asked this earlier. It's a very good question. So with me being on the ground here, there's a lot of commercial opportunity as well for Kavango to get involved in because of the nature of our financing and the funds that our backers have and their willingness to support Kavango and our initiatives here. We're looking at the entire supply chain in exploration. So we've got a number of deals that we're looking at with a view to bringing Kavango into revenue this year. We have obviously the potential at the Nara project for the processing of the sand dumps. We're just waiting on that in the near term. There's already ongoing mining activity at Hillside. It's not a huge amount, but it could all be contributing towards our bottom line. So now that I'm here on the ground and established, we are looking at other ventures for Kavango to get involved in to bring us into revenue, and hopefully over the course of 2014 get us to a point where we as a company in Zimbabwe will be operationally profitable. There really is just enormous opportunity in this country, and I think for an exploration company that otherwise would be totally dependent on the market for raising its funds, if we can get ourselves into being a much more sustainable business, that's obviously really going to strengthen our hand. So now that I'm down here, we're very, very keen to pursue those opportunities, and we did have some very good discussions at Indaba, at the Indaba meetings we had with some potential partners. So again, there'll be some news on that in the near future. Okay,
well, I look forward to discussing those plans when they're ready, Ben, and some of the results. I hope you haven't forgotten about, of course, Botswana, which was, of course, until recently a big focus of the company.
Absolutely not. So our efforts in Botswana, we've refocused much more on the Kalahari Copper Belt. Now, I know that our shareholders would like to have drilled much more in the Copper Belt previously. What will become clear to our shareholders over the coming months is that had we pursued the original plan and we'd stuck to the path that we were on, I'll be honest, Mark, it would have ended in disaster. We were looking in completely the wrong area, and our sort of understanding of the Copper Belt at that stage, it wasn't sort of where it needed to be in terms of our next exploration efforts. But while we've gone a bit quiet in the news flow in Botswana, what I would say is what we have announced, it has cost the company quite a lot of money. So these airborne surveys that we've been flying, this is not cheap exploration, but it's very vital for understanding about the structures that we're looking at and really zoning in on the target areas for us to conduct our drilling. Now, we're moving towards drill targeting now. We received the airborne data last week that we were waiting on. So Jeremy and Hilary and the team with Dave as well are now working through that with a view to identifying sort of the key specific target areas that we want to focus on. We're then going to follow up with some ground geophysics to look for specific drill targets. We also have, of course, the ENRG data that we acquired as part of the deal to buy the ground from ENRG at the tail end of last year. So the program there is really gaining some strong momentum. We've held our peace at the moment because I think in the past where a lot of our announcements and our strategy was much more promotional than it is today. What we're actually focusing now on is much more solid exploration. So we're waiting to have something meaningful to say on Botswana, but I hope that will be in the near future. Now, one of the great things about the strategy in Botswana is that the ground that we've got 7,800 square kilometers of prime real estate in the Kalahari Copper Belt. Our mission in Botswana, we're targeting much larger scale discoveries than we are in Zimbabwe at the moment. This really is blue sky exploration. So the ground that we believe covers 2 copper mineralizing systems. We've lent a great deal on Dave Catterall's 20 years experience in the belt. So he's had a hugely positive impact on our exploration in this area. And what that's all taking us to now is this map. Now, we've talked in the RNSs about the target zones that we're looking at. We believe that we have 2 separate copper mineralizing systems running through our ground. This illustration, it is an illustration at this stage. This all still needs to be verified by drill testing, which we're going to be moving into just a little bit later on this year. But overall, these are the two main structures that we're looking at. And as you can see, the 4 licenses up by the Namibian border, that was what we called our Karakubis block. So we knew that ground was very prospective. And if you look to the northeast, where you have PL 036, this was where we previously focused our efforts. Now, in the past, we'd focused on the eastern end and the northern end of that block. But as you can see, the target zone actually looks like it's over to the southwest. So had we sort of pursued that strategy, this is what I talked about earlier, I think we probably would have come up with a dud, and we could have well missed like the major opportunity, which is further to the west. Now, the ground that's in between that was the former ENRG ground. And as you can see, that's what's now given us this contiguous block over what we believe are these highly prospective areas. So we're very excited by what we've seen so far in the airborne survey. Mm-hmm. The geophysics data appears to conform with what we know about the region structures and where there's been successful discoveries further to the northeast up at T3 and at zone 5. In particular, we're seeing quite analogous sort of structures that were around A4 and T3, which are now owned by Sandfire. What it's then going to be up to us to do is to get the truth machine out and go and drill these targets and see, first of all, are these the copper mineralizing systems that we believe they are? And second, can we identify commercial deposits within this area? We've got a lot of ground to go for. And if you look at the success historically that Mod Resources had discovering T3 and A4, if you look at the Khoemacau ground as well, these all hold multiple deposits. So we could well find that there are multiple discoveries to be made in this ground that we're looking at here.
And the truth machine then, of course, the drill, that's planned to happen when roughly?
Towards the end of this quarter, at the start of next quarter. So we're still on target for that at the moment. A lot will depend on how quickly Hillary can mobilize his guys out to the field to do IP. We've actually just been doing some IP that we announced on our Hillside, on the Nara project and on the Hillside project. So we're doing a bit in Zimbabwe at the moment, but as soon as Hillary can get his guys out there, then we should be ready to commission the contract for drilling and then start as soon as the driller is ready. So we're moving as quickly as we can towards what I believe will be a very exciting drill campaign.
Good stuff. And I did notice on the previous slide about the strategy, you want to get to, was it sell a company or something? Was it?
So we'd be looking for partners to come in to work with us. So ultimately, what we're here to do is to discover a deposit and develop that deposit up to the point that it can become commercialized. So there'll be obviously a number of options, but our first focus now, Mark, is to drill as much as we can and identify potentially sort of commercial intersections of copper mineralization. So that's really our focus. That's our objective. It's obviously greenfield exploration, so we know that it's high risk. We've got a bit of sand cover to contend with, not much, but this is unexplored area. No one really knows what's beneath the ground here, so it's up for us to go and test it.
So yeah, a bit of an exciting exploration season ahead then, Ben. Hopefully a good 2024 for the company.
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to it. I just can't wait to start getting some of these results out into the market. It has taken sort of quite a long time, but with the processes that we're now following and the robust exploration we're pursuing, yeah, Kavango is in the best shape it's ever been. And it's just great to be involved in this company. This job is, after a difficult couple of years, this job is really turning into something special. And the work that our team is doing is fantastic, Mark. I mean, the commitment that they're putting into this job day in, day out is really extremely admirable. So it's going well.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Ben Turney, the CEO of Kavango Resources, and let's do another special feature on some of the projects specifically when we can talk about some of the exploration plans there and indeed the results when appropriate. But for now, thank you very much.
When we've got the results, we'd love to share them. Thanks, Mark.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.